a record number of Americans, 42% of people actually say that they identify politically as an independent. Now, that's a lot more than anybody who identifies as a Democrat or a Republican, and that's according to a brand new poll. Now, self-identified Republicans fell to 25%, and with the GOP having the types of problems that it's having today with messaging and branding, I'm not necessarily surprised. It's actually the lowest amount of people for the GOP in 25 years. Now, Democrats have actually stayed consistent. The number of people self-identifying as Democrats stays the same at 31%. Now, pollsters has actually indicated that 40% of U.S. citizens say that they're independent in each of the last 3 years, even though Wednesday's figure is actually the highest total since Gallup actually started measuring people's political independent leanings. Now, what's kind of fascinating about this is that Mitt Romney captured about 89% of the Republican-leaning independents, and Obama actually won 84% of the Democratic-leaning independents. So, independent doesn't necessarily mean independent when you have basically a subset of those independents, most actually leaning towards one party or another. So are they really independents or not? Now, I want to get the panel's reaction on some of these polls and what you think this means for American politics in general.
Well, I mean, as the libertarian on the panel and an independent, I overall think it's a great thing, right? Like, the more people who are upset with the Democrat and Republican parties, like, the better for me. But the stats that you gave about how 80+% of the Republican-leaning and Democratic-leaning candidates, independents, vote with those candidates, really means that it's not independent in so much of a presidential perspective. It's more the people who will primary an establishment candidate. And I think, like, for the Republican Party in general, it's a disaster. But for, like, people who want more conservative candidates or more libertarian candidates, it's a great thing. And the Democrats, they're just not primarying anybody. So I think it's pretty lame.
Well, I mean, for me, like, personally looking at those statistics, I mean, I think a lot of the time people want to say I'm independent rather than say I'm definitely Republican or I'm definitely Democrat, because they don't. If they say that they're a Republican, then their friends, family, co-workers, whatever, they say, oh, if you're a Republican, then you must be like all other Republicans. So you have to go, with the crazies on the right or the crazies on the left. And of course, Bill O'Reilly, I think Hannity as well. They both say, oh no, I'm independent, sort of thing. I may vote Republican, but I'm definitely an independent. It's like, well, not really. And I think there's probably a large swathe of that heavily leaning kind of Republican independent that just don't want to quite attach themselves to the entirety of the Republican Party.
That's a really good point.
There's definitely this this notion of free thinking that goes along with calling yourself an independent versus calling yourself a Democrat or Republican. And also keep in mind that post 2010, a lot of independents, that's just code word for Tea Party Republican. They're just as far to the right, if not further, and not in a good way like I think Sean would argue libertarians are. But there's independence is a really, really loaded word these days. I mean, I'm technically an independent. I didn't even vote for Obama in 2012. But I mean, at the end of the day, if there's no third party candidate, I'm almost always going to vote Democrat, over Republican.
Right, and there is this sort of thought that if I say I'm an independent, then automatically that puts me in a field above partisan politics. Oh, look at me, I'm an independent. Even though I vote 90% of the time with the Democrats or 90% of the time with the Republicans, I'm still better than you because I'm more open-minded. I'm more swayed by the issues. Now, there's a recent study, actually, that I had quoted on one of my shows before that actually shows that a lot of independents don't really know the issues at all. They're not even asked to really learn about the issues that they're voting on, and they're not as motivated as well to learn the issues, so they're more easily confused, which I found really, really fascinating.
Well, I mean, to me, it's important to draw distinctions. Like, there's a distinction between, I would say, swing voters or the undecided voters who don't know who they're going to vote for like a week before the election. Like, those are like the dumbest people in the room. Like, they don't know any issues or anything like that.
Exactly.
There's the people who claim to be independents for the reasons that you guys laid out. They don't want to be associated with the Republican or Democratic Party, just in like conversationally, but they end up voting overwhelmingly. Like, there's some studies that independents vote more to party lines than people who actually register with one of the two parties.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the people who actually vote independent, which I would be under that category. Like, I don't vote for Democrat or Republican candidates. I think I voted for one in my entire life, and that was Ron Paul, and that's basically it. So I don't vote for Democrat or Republican candidates, and that's the distinction I would draw between this poll and what I want to see happen. Is sure, they're saying that they're independent, but they're not voting independent. They're just saying that they would theoretically switch sides if the circumstances would allow it, even though they don't even do that. They vote more with the Democrats and the Republicans than normal party candidates.
I think it's kind of a case of like, oh, I like some of the things that Republicans say, but I don't like all of them, so I'm not going to throw kind of all of my eggs into that basket. I mean, just to make a comparison, I think one of the problems that American politics does have, in talking about kind of a third party, is that people, because they don't want to be in either side, they say, right, I'll be in the middle, and they kind of you get that sense that they're waiting for a third party. Whereas here in the UK, like kind of the most recent statistics of like party affiliation is kind of 30% Conservative, 30% Labour, roughly 19% Liberal Democrat, and we've got a whole ton of other minor parties, Green Party, UK Independence Party, and we've got, I think there's like 17 or so that actually have a representative elected. And there's only about 16% of people who say kind of none of these major parties. So really kind of, you'd say kind of the independents here, or they are potentially undecided, but the independents in the UK, about 16%, but that's because we have so much more choice. We've got more parties that are focused on particular issues, whereas in America you've just got Democrats and Republicans, and that's all.
I think more people are identifying as independent because they're sick. They're sick of the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're sick of all the gridlock, and they want to be called something else. I think that's a main driver in this. And I mean, do you guys agree?
Yeah, but I would also like to add that the Tea Party is a good representation of independents. Like, I know a lot of them are just Republicans, but they do primary establishment candidates. Like, you have to have a two-pronged strategy if you're an independent, in my opinion. You have to try and build up a third-party candidate, but you also have to start messing up the main political parties because they already have the system. And if you start taking over the local levels of government, like the Tea Party does, then you control, the county. Like, the county chairman usually endorses, the state senator. Like, you got to
get guerrilla warfare.
Yeah,
it's that sort of tactics in politics. You just got to do hit and run tactics in these small scale instances.
Right. And the Tea Party is really good at doing that. Like, and I don't agree with a lot of the candidates they nominate. And one of the bigger trends that I'm actually happy about is every time they nominate a social conservative nut job, they tend to lose, like Ken Cuccinelli, Christine O'Donnell. But on the flip side, if they nominate a more libertarian candidate, they usually win. So, like, to me, like, you got to push them in there, and you got to try and do it. Like the Tea Party strategy is a great strategy. There are almost no Democratic senatorial primary challenges, and I think the Republicans have something like 13 out of 16 of their incumbents are being primary. Like, you gotta primary people.
You're arguing against yourself here, man. The Tea Party is not a local movement that starts local and spreads wide. It was funded from the top movement. The reason why Occupy Wall Street failed was because it was a local movement that picked up local issues and didn't unite around one thing. Whereas the Tea Party unites around, money.
But the Tea Party is a mixture. You had the story out of Georgia about the Tea Party teaming up with the environmentalist movement to get to break up the energy companies' monopoly to get more solar panels in there. Like, you have a lot of different strains of Tea Partiers. Like, my favorite poll a long time ago, and I'll admit it's a long time ago, is just when Sarah Palin started getting into the Tea Party. It was basically a split between what kind of candidates they would support. It was going to be like the Sarah Palin social conservative nut job, who I would also say is also the more money-driven side, or it was like the Ron Paul type. So there are actual Tea Party people, and there are Tea Party people who have been kicked out of the Tea Party because they won't like take Coke money or
the Tea Party term is it's such a broad term.
Truly,
I mean, much like independent, that it's just. I think what I get the sense that kind of the American people, they're clamoring for some sort of new label that they can identify themselves as. I know, like, kind of Cenk on the Young Turks, he kind of tries to identify as a progressive, but I just think there needs to be a new term that needs to kind of work its way into kind of the lexicon of the American public.
And right now, all they have is independent.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the Tea Party is right. I'm just saying their strategy of primarying people is definitely right.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
I would love to see somebody on the Democratic side doing the same thing.
No, and yeah, that's totally true. I don't have nearly as favorable of an outlook as you do, but there was a lot of truth to what you said.